Welcome to the Page One Podcast, a podcast featuring a variety of guests and thought leaders on topics ranging from digital marketing, sales channel strategies, influencer marketing, best-in-class product launches, and all the details about how to accelerate sales. Now, here's your host, Luke Peters.
Thanks for joining us on the Page One Podcast. I'm your host, Luke Peters, CEO of Newer Appliances. And in this episode, you're going to learn from Lauren Picasso, CEO and founder of Cure Hydration, on how to raise capital and how to go to market D2C with Amazon and on marketplace sales accounts. Lauren is the founder and CEO of Cure Hydration, a VC-backed functional hydration brand that launched in 2019 after she was training for a triathlon and struggling to recover from the long workouts. Prior to Cure Hydration, she was an early employee at Jet.com, which is acquired by Walmart. As director of marketing at Jet, Lauren worked across a variety of online and offline marketing channels and helped to scale the company to over 10 million customers. She was also an early employee of Rent the Runway, has worked for Google, Bloomingdale's, and Ralph Lauren. Lauren also earned an MBA from Harvard Business School and a bachelor's degree from University of Pennsylvania in cognitive neuroscience. Lauren, thanks for joining us on the Page One Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, and always a little intimidated with these degrees you have. So it's like I always remember going through high school, and I was just happy to graduate. And then there's people like you who are going off to Harvard and studying these degrees I can't even pronounce. Yeah, it's cool that you make it into entrepreneurship, because I think, folks sometimes don't think about what a big difference they can make in the world. So we're going to have a kind of a fun conversation today. And, before we jump into it, why don't you quickly tell the audience a little bit about Cure Hydration and, what kind of customers you serve?
Absolutely. So Cure Hydration is an organic electrolyte mix that's based on the science behind the World Health Organization's formula for oral rehydration solutions. This formula has been around for over 50 years, and it's actually proven to hydrate as effectively as an IV drip. So really powerful. It's primarily been used in developing countries for people who are suffering from severe dehydration. And what we've done is actually taken that same formula, but updated it with organic ingredients. So instead of using sugar or dextrose, which is what most other players on the market are using, we use a base of organic coconut water and pink Himalayan salt. Our product's organic certified, non-GMO, sustainably sourced, and has no added sugar. So essentially a healthier product than what else is on the market, but just as effective.
That's awesome. And if you don't mind, I'll ask you a few more questions on this. I know there's probably a bunch of athletes listening. So does it have any calories, or is just the calories that are inside the coconut oil or coconut water?
Yeah, from the coconut water. So it's 25 calories per serving, and there's 4 grams of naturally occurring sugar from the organic coconut water. And that sugar is actually what makes this formula effective when it's paired with sodium. So that's the sort of mechanism behind the WHO formula. But all of the sugar, it comes from the coconut water. There's no added sugar at all.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And I've done some distance sports, and Lauren and I were talking about that kind of before the podcast. And one thing is I started out, drinking the sports drinks, but after a while I just totally gave them up because a lot of times they'll have fructose in it, and it's, especially if you're doing, and it's not good for your stomach. And actually like your body kind of gets used to taking on less sugar over time. And it's definitely a healthier, better way to go. So yeah, I totally understand that formula, and really glad there's more, options on the market like this compared to just the sugary waters with salt in them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing, how prominent sports drinks still are with professional athletes and amateur athletes, despite having an average of 30 plus grams of sugar per bottle.
Yeah. And the wrong kind of sugar too.
Exactly.
Cool. So how many team members do you have in Cure Hydration?
We're a small team. So right now we're a team of 4 full-time employees, and then we have 10 part-time and contractor employees.
Great. And what is your most important KPI now? And like I mentioned to the audience, so you launched this in 2019, so still relatively new, but it looks like you have some great distribution that we'll talk about. So what kind of KPIs are you really focused on as a business owner?
The main KPI we're looking at is LTV. And so we are primarily looking at our cost of acquisition as it relates to LTV. The nature of our product is, since it's a CPG product, it's a fairly low average price. Our average cart value isn't super high just because our product is a rather low price point. And so because of that, we're really trying to drive frequency of purchase. So looking at that LTV metric is really the core driver.
Great. And what are can you explain the size of the product to the listener? Because I have more questions about LTV, such as like how many units or, average order size, and we can get more into that, but like, what size are the typical orders and each unit?
Yeah. So our product comes in a single serve stick pack that you mix with 8 to 16 ounces of water, depending on your preference. We have a few different formats that we sell, but online, we're primarily selling a 14-pack pouch. So there's 14 servings inside. We see that on average, customers are ordering 2 packs at a time, especially our customers who are subscribing to the product. So the idea is that they're drinking the product every day. And so often they'll subscribe to monthly shipments and have a pack of each flavor and 28 servings in total.
That's great. And your primary advertising platforms, are you using Google, Facebook for the primary traffic source or lead generation?
Yeah, so our primary channels are the traditional channels, paid social and paid search. We also do a lot of affiliate marketing. So we have an ambassador program of professional athletes, mostly women, that are marketing our product on social media and getting commission for the sales that they drive. We have a referral program from our customers that actually drives a decent amount of traffic as well. And then we do a lot of sampling programs.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So we're going to get into that for the audience. Great. So again, kind of the theme of this is we're going to talk about raising capital, but also how you take it to market. So why don't we start, with the years leading up to Cure Hydration? Where did you kind of gain the confidence and experience to launch your own brand?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is in e-commerce and marketing. I spent my career working in retail. So started off as a buyer for Bloomingdale's, and then I was an early employee at Rent the Runway, which was my first real taste of the startup world. And I absolutely loved it. I really enjoyed building products and solving problems. And so knew that was what I wanted to do with my career. After that, I went to business school to really try to gain a foundation in some of the areas that I didn't have expertise in. I was a psychology and cognitive neuroscience major undergrad, so really wanted to have a better understanding of finance, accounting, and just get that high-level bird's-eye view of business. After going to business school, I was an early employee at Jet.com, where I was the director of marketing. I started the company about a year before they launched and stayed all the way through the Walmart acquisition. So was there for about 4 years in total before deciding to leave and start Cure.
That's awesome. And doing director of marketing for a larger company, a fast growing company, Jet.com. But now you're doing, as a founder of a startup, it's probably a totally different style of marketing. Is that fair to say? It's really guerrilla marketing and grassroots and really having to get down to the actual customer, where maybe a Jet, you're building a larger organization, or did those skills transfer over pretty good?
Yeah. So, it was totally different. At Jet, we had raised $570 million before we launched. So had a massive marketing budget out of the gate. And, really day one, we were advertising in offline channels like TV and out of home and direct mail and radio, which, most startups wouldn't do. And I honestly wouldn't recommend that they do. But Jet's ambition really was to be going after Amazon. So trying to get scale really quickly. In the case of a CPG brand, we are much smaller in terms of in a number of ways. But, just in the nature of the products we're selling, we have about 10 SKUs, and Jet.com had 30,000 products. So very different in nature. Yeah, a lot of what we're doing is much scrappier, much more grassroots, as you said. It's very, much focused on sampling and driving trial, because taste is so important to conversion, and also getting credibility. So gaining credibility with our ambassador program, our medical advisory board. So a lot of our marketing is focused on that. That being said, I think, getting such broad exposure at Jet.com was really helpful. Being able to get experience in every marketing channel out there, since we were really live in every channel, really just gave me a solid toolkit that I could apply to a number of different types of businesses, including Cure.
Great. And leading up to that, I mean, you have a really great education. And so if you could sum up the value of your Harvard MBA in 30 seconds, I'm just, obviously there's so many different things you must have learned, but really making that, just sum it up in a tangible way of how that translates into your business. That'd be great to hear.
Yeah, so my business school experience was very focused on entrepreneurship, and most of the classes I took were focused on entrepreneurship. I'd say the biggest lesson I learned was to build an MVP and validate your idea before investing a lot of money. So getting those proof points before you launch, so that you can iterate the product and save a lot of time and money in the long run.
That's great advice and a great learning. 100% agree with that after not doing it a few times myself in the past. And so let's move on to Cure Hydration. What led you to start the company, and where did you see the white space in the market?
Yeah, so I started the company when I was training for a triathlon a few years ago, and I would come back from my long runs and feel terrible to the point where I would get headaches, I would feel nauseous, and I'd essentially be out of commission for 24 hours. And, what I found was that drinking water on its own was just not enough to replace the electrolytes I was losing. But all of the electrolyte products on the market, like Gatorade and Powerade, were just full of added sugar and artificial ingredients. And so I wanted to create a product that was both effective, but that I felt good about drinking every day, because even though I was training for a triathlon, I'm not a professional athlete and didn't want to be consuming all of this sugar, let alone, all these artificial ingredients. And so the idea behind Cure Hydration is, an effective product that's made with ingredients that you can feel good about drinking every day. So even if you're not training for a triathlon, if you're just, you don't even have to be that active. It's a product that you can enjoy and even just use to drink more water.
Great. And then from there, take us from there to, I guess the next thing I wanted to get into is how do you go to market with an MVP and things that you did to differentiate the brand. But how about kind of fill in the white space between those things? So you had an idea, you're training. Who'd your first call go to? Did you bring on, any other experts that kind of helped you develop this idea? What was, going through your mind between then and actually having a product and that MVP stage?
Yeah, so it started off with a lot of research. I started combing different running blogs and triathlon blogs to find different types of products. And I actually saw that a lot of athletes were using Pedialyte, which is something that's gotten very popular for hangovers, but a lot of athletes are using it to recover and hydrate from their long workouts. And I found that Pedialyte was really the only product that worked for me. But like I said earlier, it's still full of sugar and artificial ingredients, and it's obviously branded for children. And so I started doing more research to figure out, why Pedialyte is effective. And that's how I discovered the World Health Organization formula. And it was this big aha moment for me. I saw that the formula, it's published online. There's, over 50 years of research to show that it hydrates 2 to 3 times faster and more effectively than water on its own. And it's really quite simple. It's just, components of the formula are sodium, glucose, and potassium. And I thought, maybe I can get those electrolytes and that glucose from natural and organic ingredients instead of synthetic ingredients. And so that's really how it started. My first email actually out to an investor in the space was to Peter Rahal, who is one of the founders of RX Bar. He had actually just gotten acquired by Kellogg, and I decided to reach out. He had just gotten acquired, so I was really excited to talk to a young founder. And yeah, he essentially did the same thing in the space for bars, which was a lot more crowded than the hydration space. But came in and really saw that there wasn't a protein bar on the market that wasn't full of junk. And so yeah, he's sort of the first phone call to help me think through what an MVP might look like and how I would test it.
Okay, great. And so you reach out to someone who's already done it before, and I would just like to state that's the number one thing, especially when you're hiring, bringing on people on your team, right? You want someone who's done that before. And I've learned all different ways, but that's a good starting point. And then how did you move to an MVP?
Yeah, so I just started mixing in my kitchen. So I would buy coconut water, which I knew was really high in potassium, but also had, was a source of sugar or glucose. And I started mixing together coconut water, pink Himalayan salt, and lemon juice, and started testing it out in my workouts to see if it made me feel better. And it did. So it was, worked really well. The main problem with it was that it didn't taste very good. As you could imagine, like salty coconut water on its own is not necessarily delicious. And so I ended up hiring a formulator to help me develop the formula and really make it taste better, while still holding true to the science behind the WHO formula. So I found a formulator to help me develop the original formula. And at that point, I decided, instead of doing a liquid, I really wanted to do a powder. I really liked powder because it's lightweight and cheap to ship online, but it's also a lot more environmentally friendly. So I just, couldn't get around creating another plastic ready-to-drink bottle, and really liked that powder was super portable, much more lightweight, used less packaging. So it had a lot of elements that I really liked. So we found dehydrated coconut water, and this formulator started mixing around different flavors. From there, I hired a manufacturer to help me produce the product. But our MVP really was actually a pilot run. So they have minimum order quantities that they require, but was able to convince them to let me do a trial with much lower quantities, and launch that product into market on Shopify to test and see whether the formula would work or not.
Awesome. And I have a bunch of questions about that. I definitely completely like and agree with the idea of going on the powder-based formula, especially, obviously for the environmental reasons, but, just for the customer not having to lug around a bunch of bottles of stuff, especially if they're traveling,
Right.
I've been in that. Yeah. You just bring your water bottle and your whatever container you're drinking out of, and you can just wash that out. And also for shipping, and because we ship big stuff at my company. And so we're always like, 95% of our stuff can't go into certain small packages that product like yours can. So it's really easy if you wanted to work with Amazon and go FBA, or even through Shopify, or even through different postal methods that can reduce shipping fees. So there's a lot of advantages to get down to that form factor. Kind of when you're kind of making decisions and you come up with your MVP, and you said you launched a Shopify site. Let's talk about the fundraising. Let's kind of jump down to that really quick.
Yeah.
You could have maybe thought about bootstrapping it, but maybe that would have slowed down your marketing and go-to-market strategy. What was your kind of decision criteria that you used?
Yeah, so I actually did bootstrap the company for the first 9 months. My goal was really to develop a brand. We didn't invest really heavily in it. We didn't hire an agency or anything like that. Just a couple of freelancers, but some brand. An MVP, so some early prototypes of the formula, and decided to raise money. This was back in 2018, a small pre-seed round, essentially just to purchase inventory for this pilot run.
Okay.
But by then, I felt like, we had a prototype in place. We had sampled it and done focus groups with hundreds of people, and had already gotten a lot of feedback on the product from potential customers. So it felt like that at that point, I had enough information to feel confident in launching a pilot. And then from there, after we launched the pilot, we actually ended up making some tweaks to our formula based on feedback, launched a new formula last year in early 2020. And from there saw a lot of growth. And that's when we decided to raise our seed round.
Great. Was there a particular reason? Because you could have maybe continued, right? Or did the seed round also allow you to maybe engage with some investors that were going to help you expand your distribution? Are you able to kind of talk us through that strategy?
Yeah, really the point of raising that seed round was to build out a team. So up until September of 2020, it was just me. And we had started getting into a lot of stores. So we had launched in CVS and Walmart and Whole Foods. And it was just simply too much to take on all by myself. I knew that if I started hiring people, that we could accelerate the growth of the company much faster.
That's awesome. And that's also the definition of a sure bet for those investors. You're already in store.
Right.
A one-person shop. So that's great.
encourage people to have, case studies, and proof points at every single stage so that they're fundraising at the right time and striking when the iron is hot versus, trying to fundraise when you don't have data, you don't have momentum.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. You always want to be, on the way up. So talk about, because I did want to get into that. And I know it's always interesting to other business owners that are listening. Let's talk about these hires. What were the key titles that you wanted to kind of build out on the team?
Yeah, so I mentioned we have 4 full-time employees, including myself. So we have a head of operations who oversees supply chain, production, fulfillment, and customer service. Still a very meaty role for one person. A head of sales who oversees business development and account management for all of our existing accounts, as well as retail marketing in those stores. And then we have a head of brand marketing who oversees all of our organic channels. So email, affiliate marketing, social media, managing all of our creative freelancers and, really owning the creative development process.
And I'm guessing that's the hardest role because that's the one the most about, right? So you're you to lean in on that one the most. So yeah, that's funny.
It's funny. I actually, hired the team in the reverse order. I mean, in that order. So I first hired operations, then sales and marketing. And my thought process was actually, let's prioritize the roles where you have the least experience. So I didn't have any background in operations or manufacturing. And that was really where I was struggling the most. And having to spend a lot of my time is just because I was so new to the business. And so that was the number one role that I hired for because I knew that we couldn't support these big retail launches unless we got our supply chain in a really good place.
Great. And then can you quickly touch on kind of launching the products? How did you get into these stores? I mean, you got into 3 stores in 9 months. That's phenomenal success. You probably had a bunch of options when you were fundraising. How did you get in there? And talk about how you differentiated the product and, kind of created that compelling reason to get into those stores.
Yeah, so the category, we were fortunate that this category is gaining a lot of momentum. There's other brands in the market that have been really successful, like Liquid IV. So retailers are already really excited about this category, which is great. Our main differentiation is really our ingredients. So everyone else in the market is using a base of cane sugar and synthetic minerals, and we're using organic coconut water and pink Himalayan salt. So we're the only organic product in the market, and really are positioning ourselves, if you think of sort of the good, better, best strategy, thinking of ourselves as the premium brand in the category. And that's certainly what our customers are coming to us for. As far as, how we got into different retailers, each retailer was totally different. We did do a lot of testing. So, our first year we launched on Shopify, Amazon, and Thrive Market. But we did a lot of testing locally in New York. So started going literally door to door, selling into different bodegas and small grocery stores, fitness studios, and just trying to get a good understanding of the right format. So, should we be selling single serve or full-size pouches or boxes, understanding pricing and velocity. And that really helps us, hone in on our sales strategy moving forward before going and approaching some of these bigger retailers. We were also fortunate to be part of CVS's healthcare innovation program. So they have, really invested in trying to bring on new emerging brands into CVS, which typically is hard for a small brand to get into a big retailer. And so we had done a pilot with them in July of 2019 in 8 stores. And similarly, actually got to test a couple of different formats and flavors, different pricing, until we found something that works. And then, once we started seeing the velocities we needed, that's when they decided to scale us to 4,000 stores.
What a great story. That's so fast that you were able to ramp that up. So that's, so it sounds like, you definitely needed the support and some capital for that. What was your biggest surprise you had, when you were in the fundraising process? And then also, how long did it take start to finish for that seed round?
Yeah. So the biggest surprise, it was an interesting time to do fundraising because it was during the pandemic. So I actually didn't meet any investors in person, which is definitely unusual. But I think the biggest surprise, and partially because of the pandemic, was how much investors cared about profitability and cash efficiency. So in my previous days at Debt.com, it was quite the opposite. It was all about growth, and there really was no focus on profitability at all. So much so that we didn't even have a positive gross margin. And so that's really what I was surprised at. And, what I found was that, investors were most impressed with how little capital we had raised up until that point and how much progress we had made. So by the time we closed that round, we were actually profitable. And that was something that really stood out about Cure compared to other players in the space, but also other companies they have seen in other categories.
Yeah. And in that process, how do you avoid being diluted too much? I'm sure with the listeners, there's all different types of investors, and some of them, 100% shareholders, and some of them might have worked with PEs or strategics, but in your case, you're working with VC. Did you have options, or do you have guidance on, kind of avoiding too much dilution, and how did that work?
Yeah, I always, try to tell other founders to not think too much about dilution, because it's really actually the founder's job to be maximizing value. And so I like to think about it, if I would prefer personally to own 10% of a $100 million company than 100% of a $10 million company, because that will have meant that it's created a lot more value. And so that's really how I think about it. I do think, that being said, it's important to raise money at the right time. And so, figuring out what those next milestones are to get the valuation that you're looking for, so that you can raise money at appropriate dilution levels, is important. And so I think, that is at the end of the day about creating value. You're trying to take what investment you have, whether that's, your own savings that you're, bootstrapping, or, a small pre-seed round, taking that and really maximizing it as far as possible, is going to, end up creating more value for your company, and then inherently actually diluting you less in the end.
That makes a lot of sense. And are you doing, you going back for another round, or where are you in that process?
Yeah, we'll likely raise a Series A round in the next 12 to 18 months. But then after that, we don't plan to raise any additional capital.
And along this process, getting into the different stores, and really, you've worked with obviously large companies with Jet, and then having to bootstrap this and really become a, guerrilla marketer, in the sense that I'm sure you had, it sounds like you're going right to the end customer, you're surveying people, you're really finding out their preferences. Along that whole thing, that whole journey, what's the best marketing advice that you think you can now share with other people because you've learned it through this process?
Yeah, I think it's really important to have a mindset of experimentation. So you should always be testing different channels. You should be with any, channels that are proven to have worked, like Facebook, always testing new creative, new offers, new landing pages. Really just always challenging whatever was working in the past and testing as much as possible to see if you can beat it. That's, really the way to grow within marketing, because eventually you're going to see diminishing returns on whatever you were doing before.
I love it. I'm totally with you. And it's the most fun to work with other marketing people who kind of see that same way, and they have fun and like to challenge, maybe an initial thesis on something. And, it's just a lot more fun to be running a business that way when you're creative and always testing and always moving, because the world doesn't stop. So
exactly.
Yeah, that's great advice. Just kind of finishing up here, especially for younger entrepreneurs, you've had a fast moving career, you got your education, worked, then got your MBA, then, worked for Jet, doing all kinds of other things like competing in triathlons. What drives you? Where did that kind of internal motivation come from?
Yeah, I'd say, I've always grown up that way, and I was always really inspired by my father. My father always wanted to be an entrepreneur, but he was pretty risk adverse and really wanted to make sure that he provided us with a really good education. So he worked in, corporate America at various companies like GE for years. And then when we finally, went to college, he decided that's when he wanted to start a company. And, he waited until he had all of the experience and contacts and capital to do it without any of the risk of potentially, ruining sort of our own trajectory. So I always felt, him just working so hard to inevitably, get where he wanted to go. And, I didn't wait as long as he waited, but similarly, really wanted to get the experience and confidence in working at other startups that were successful before starting my own.
And, I have actually one last question, because I know, and we talked about this kind of, pre-podcast, where you also are now starting to, invest in other female-founded companies. So on that same thing, you had your father as a role model. Now you're starting your own business. Is there something specific that you look for in these female entrepreneurs that makes you maybe want to invest? Besides the idea or the product or what success, is there like an attribute or characteristic that you're really hoping to find?
Yeah, I'm looking for entrepreneurs that are super scrappy, really resourceful. I'm looking for people who are trying to make the most out of what they have and really maximize that. I think that's, for me, what makes a really good entrepreneur. I think resilience is really important. I think being able to handle rejection and, keep going and believing in your idea is super important. That being said, I always do look for products and ideas that I can relate to. Since I'm not spending 100% of my time investing, I try to, find products where I have expertise or I feel like I can really add value. Since it's not something that I'm doing with 100% of my time.
Well, that's so well said. You chose really good words there. Scrappy, not afraid of rejection. Those are such important themes and rare, even just those two in combination. Wow, it's been a lot of fun to have you on the podcast today, Lauren. How can listeners find you or learn more about you or Cure Hydration?
The best place to find me would be on LinkedIn. Just search for Lauren Picasso. And then our website, Cure Hydration, is curehydration.com.
Great. And we'll have that in the show notes. Again, I want to thank you for being a guest and thank everybody for listening to this episode of the Page One podcast. Hope you all enjoyed the interview today. Truly appreciate your reviews on iTunes and hope everybody joins us for the next interview. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Page One podcast with Luke Peters. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us out by leaving us a rating on iTunes. Want to double your online sales? Check out www.retailband.com. And don't forget to join us next week with our next amazing guest.